The Vanisher video is finally here. You guys have been asking me up and down, where's the Vanisher video? Are you gonna make a Vanisher video? When's the Vanisher video? And I originally didn't want to do a Vanisher video because Quadeca himself already did like a 5-hour long live stream breaking down everything about the production. So I'm like, it's a bit redundant for me to cover it when the man himself already did. But then I figured, what if I went deeper into the album? What if I discussed the music theory behind every single song rather than just the production? So that's exactly what we're doing here. And this video is so educational. I myself learned so much just from making this video. So if you really want to understand the intricacies of Quadeca's music and also just improve your music theory knowledge tenfold, this video is for you. If you can't tell, I'm super excited to finally get this video out. I've been working on this one for a long time. But before I get into the dissection of any of these songs, I have 5 prefaces I want to go over. This is just going to make the viewing experience a little bit better and have it make a little bit more sense. So number 1, this video is going to be pretty bare bones in terms of editing, mostly because its main value is education rather than entertainment. So I'm going to be focusing purely on what I can teach you guys, and I'm not going to try to take away from it with like flashy transitions or sound effects every 3 seconds. Secondly, I do not have a music theory degree, so I may use incorrect terminology at times without realizing it. If I do, please call me out in the comments and correct me so that both you guys can have the most accurate information possible and so that I can learn the terms that I'm actually supposed to be using. Though all the information in this video is near 100% accurate, so you'll still be learning good, useful information, I just might use incorrect words at times. Third, I spent around 2 months putting together this video and it is most definitely getting copyright claimed. So if you guys want to support me in any way while also getting something insanely useful for yourself, I'll be putting the MIDI files for every single song along with my breakdown FLPs that I'm going to be using in this video and a full 11-page FLP breaking down the music theory in the description down below. So if you really want to go in depth with studying the music theory behind this album, go ahead and check it out. It's only going to be like 15 bucks or something, and it would help me continue to make videos just like these. Fourth, I would like to give a huge thank you to either comment 1775 on Reddit for finding all of the chords in all of the songs on Vanisher. They helped me out greatly and made this video come out much sooner than it would have if I hadn't found that thread midway through my journey. So huge thank you to them. I'll link the original thread in the description down below if you guys want to check it out. And fifth and finally, there will be certain sections of some songs that I won't be mentioning, either because there isn't a lot to learn from them, like certain intros and outros, or they are just way too difficult and complex for me to even begin breaking them down. These cutouts are very infrequent, but I just want to give y'all a heads up because I'm not going to be dissecting every single second of every single song. So yeah, with that being said, let's get started with the first song on the album, No Questions Asked. And this song, as many of you may already know, samples a song by Chico Barake called Deus Le Pague. Sorry if I mispronounced that. And it's only really sampling one chord from the song, repeating a 2-bar long pattern. And the chord that this sample plays is incredibly interesting. It is a B major 7 sus 4, omitting the 5th, which is a very clustery and dissonant chord. This is because of the relationship between the B and the A sharp being a half step away from each other in the scale. On top of that, No Questions Asked is in F sharp major, and this E does not reside within our scale. Rather, it is derived from the F sharp Mixolydian scale. This makes the note act as a bit of an outsider, giving the chord a little bit more spice. Now, there isn't all that much going on melodically with this song aside from that sample, so we're going to be covering these lush vocal melodies instead. So here's vocal melody number 1. And this vocal melody mainly makes use of the 1 and 4 of our scale, a very sonically pleasing interval. And oftentimes this vocal melody lands on F sharp, which is the root of our scale, or like the home note where it wants to come back to. And this melody is built in a bit of a call and response structure. This first part right here is the call, making use of primarily the 1 and the 4 of our scale. And this second part right here is the response, integrating this very tension heavy A sharp that pulls upward into the 4. And as you may have deduced, this A sharp and B half step interval is derived from the chord of our sample, making use of both that B and A sharp. As well as that, it's making use of a quasi-dotted quarter rhythm, often making use of notes that are held for 1.5 beats, rather than just 1 or 2. This gives the melody a much more unique swing, rather than a typical quarter note rhythm. So now let's go over the second vocal melody, which harmonizes with the first. And this is what that one sounds like. Now, in tandem with the first vocal melody, it's making use of very consonant or pleasing harmonies. So in the gray is the first vocal melody, and these white notes are the second vocal melody. So we're making use of perfect fifths between that F sharp and B right here, as well as major sixths that outline a B major chord between D sharp and F sharp, perfect fourths between this F sharp and C sharp, and finally octaves between this F sharp and this F sharp. The first vocal melody mainly makes use of the 1, 3, 4, and 5 of our scale, whereas this one supplies the 2 and the 6, filling in the remaining notes of our scale aside from the 7, which comes in later. The stability and consonance of this vocal harmony gives a different meaning and context to that very harsh, dissonant sample chord, turning it into something very sonically pleasing and beautiful. So with that being said, this is what both of those vocal melodies sound like together. So now let's go over the last melodically prevalent aspect of this song, which is the third vocal melody. And I know I'm mainly only covering vocal melodies for this song, but that's because that's pretty much the only thing that there is to derive in terms of music theory. But trust me, for the other songs, I'm going to be going greater into detail on chords and stuff like that. So this third vocal melody plays towards the end of the song. And this vocal melody acts as a bit of a scale run, bringing all of the notes of our scale together. It naturally has a sense of journey and resolution, as you can hear the whole scale's gravity. It doesn't just feel like a small melodic phrase, rather a whole unfolding line. As well as that, in the first two vocal phrases, as I mentioned, we don't make use of the 7th of our scale. But with this, we finally bring it in, making it the most complete expression of our scale. This makes the other vocal melodies sound like pieces to a puzzle, while this one is the entire completed picture. And this melody is yet again making use of those quarter dotted rhythms, this time a little bit more heavily. And that's pretty much everything that's melodically prevalent when it comes to No Questions Asked. An incredible intro for the album, setting the theme of a clash between dissonance and consonance, which we're going to see a lot throughout this album. So now let's get into the second song of the album, Waging War. Now, the first thing that I'm going to cover for Waging War is our main synth melody that plays at the beginning of the song. And this essentially is playing an arpeggiated inversion of A major 7 and C add 6. So basically this chord and this chord. Now, this portion of the song is in E major, and that A major 7 is incredibly smooth, dreamy, and just feels nice. Whereas the C add 6 is incredibly dark and dissonant, as it borrows both the C and G from the minor version of our scale, E minor. This dynamic creates a bit of a push and pull feeling, seesawing between residing within our scale with the A major 7 and borrowing from the minor with that C add 6. The second aspect that I'd like to cover very briefly is the vocal melody during this section.
Who am I till I close the door? Let's be keeping score. Who am I when the motion stops and I can't ignore?
This vocal melody is purely playing one note, which is E, the root note of our scale. In the context of these chords, E is the 5th of that A major 7 and the 3rd of that C add 6. So even though the progression is incredibly dissonant and doesn't always reside within our scale, the vocal melody ties into both chords, giving the song a sense of stability and keeping the chords grounded, almost acting as an anchor to the main melody. I wanted to cover it very briefly, as sometimes when you have a very dissonant chord progression, it's important to have something that ties back to the root of your scale, kind of just to bring things all together. Next, I'd like to go over the second chord progression that is incredibly prevalent throughout this song. And this appears at the 38-second mark, where the key changes from E major to C major. The first half plays a progression going from the 4 to the 3 to the 5 of our scale, specifically going from F major to E minor to G major. This progression on its own wants to resolve to the 1, which yet again is C or C major, but since it stops on the 5 of our scale, which is G major, it feels tense and unresolved. And this is where the second half of our chord progression comes into play. Yet again, it's playing a progression going from the 4 to the 3 of our scale, F major to E minor, but in the root, we're making use of the 1 of our scale, C. This introduces the resolution of our root note while still retaining that open and unresolved sound of the 4 to 3 progression, giving it that kind of spooky and eerie vibe. And the vocal melody of this section doubles down on that suspense. The first phrase alternates between the 3 and 4 of our progression, moving between dissonance with that E and consonance with that F, since the chord playing at the moment is an F major 7. This is a very expressive and massively consolidated example of tension and release. And this vocal melody often resolves into notes of chords playing at the moment. So for example, it resolves down to this A, which is the 3rd of our F major chord. As well as that right here, it resolves to this C, which is yet again the 5th of our F major chord. And finally, it resolves down to this E, which is the root of our chord playing at the moment, E minor. And pretty much throughout this song, those two progressions just repeat over and over and over again, alternating between E major and C major. Aside from the end right here, which is one of those parts that I mentioned that I'm not going to be covering, because it's very, very noisy and very hard to discern what the chords are. So I'm sorry if that's a section that you really want to learn about. But in essence, the key takeaways of this song are the same, no matter what I go over. So now let's get into the next song and one of my personal favorites off the album, Ruin My Life. Now, this is the first song on the album making use of time signatures that aren't 4/4. Instead, this is playing in 3/4, giving it that waltzy, almost sea shanty-like swing. So let's go over one of my favorite progressions on the album, that main guitar melody. So this plays a downward pattern, mostly making use of minor third harmonies, while occasionally making use of perfect fourths and major thirds. And in and of themselves, these are very standard harmonies, but they are mostly playing a chromatic downward stair pattern, meaning that they don't reside within our scale. They're just walking down the keyboard, making use of all 12 notes. And one reason that this doesn't sound super dissonant or out of place is because we have the root of our scale, E, acting as an anchor. Since it's the root of our scale, it provides a sense of stability for the progression as a whole. So when notes are played that are outside of our scale, they sound a bit natural in context with that E. While still dissonant, it doesn't sound super out of place. And now let's go over one of my favorite vocal melodies on this album. If you can't tell, Ruin My Life is like one of my favorite songs of this album. Regardless, let's just go over the vocal melody. But yeah, this vocal melody only plays notes residing within our scale, making it more catchy and providing a melodic foundation for the song. On top of that, it mainly makes use of the 1, 2, 3, and 5 of our scale. And making use of the 1, 3, and 5 makes our melody sound super grounded and safe. But throwing in the 2 as a key player gives it a bit more tension and suspense, making the melody as a whole much more colorful and interesting. So now let's go over the chords during the chorus. So this progression is making use of yet another downward stair pattern, similar to our main guitar melody. And for the first 3 measures, it plays a progression going from the 4 to the 3 to the 2 to the 3 of our scale, which in and of itself is a very clustered and tension heavy progression. Though in the last measure of our pattern, the 1 is introduced with this E major, providing a release for this tension. And this is masterfully done as it's introduced during the most busy and grand part of our chorus, further amplifying the effect of the resolution. After the chorus, it just repeats that main guitar melody and vocal melody as well as the main chorus progression. Though during this outro section, we have a much different progression. Pretty much for this entire time, we're playing a progression going from G major 7 to G sharp minor 7. And this progression does well in changing the mood of the entire song from waltzy and easygoing to something more dramatic and sinister, as our G major is not a chord that resides within E major. On top of this, the root notes of our progression are a half step away from each other, further adding to the tension and drama of this outro. So if you really want to switch the mood of a song that you have, introduce progressions that are a half step away from each other and try using stuff that doesn't reside within your scale. Because as you'll see as we go over more of these songs, that is something that is incredibly prevalent throughout this album and is the bane of my existence when trying to break down these chords. So yeah, that's pretty much everything musically prevalent in Ruin My Life. So now let's go over the next song on the album, Godstained. And this song is so damn interesting when it comes to music theory. Like, I geeked out over this song. So something that I want to cover before getting into like the actual like music theory and chords and stuff like that is that Godstained itself is tuned down to 433 hertz as opposed to the traditional 440. Or in like producer terms, it's tuned down by 28 cents. And 433 hertz, if you like follow the music science theories, is a very calming and pleasing frequency, which heavily aligns with the vibe of this song. It's such like a nice, resolute song. So that's just something I wanted to cover. I don't know if it was intentional or not, but whether or not it was masterfully executed. So yeah, let's just get into the first progression we hear in the song during the verse.
Solution, there's a message on your skin. Flicking from the paper, I can read you from within. I thought you knew something that I never will. Godstained, Godstained.
Okay, so this plays a progression in the first half, going from G major 7 to B major 7. And this is an example of something called a chromatic mediant relationship, which essentially is just 2 chords that are a third apart, whether it be a major third or minor third. And both chords are either both major or both minor. And this is something that was incredibly prevalent during the Romantic era of music, and is used a lot in like film scoring nowadays, which is a technique I've seen made use of a lot throughout this album, which we'll get into later. But this is just a super interesting music theory method that you can use to create really interesting and dissonant chord progressions. As well as that, a feature of chromatic mediant relationships is the shared tone between the chords. So our G major 7 and B major 7 share both B and F sharp. Now, to transition into the next half of the progression, Quadeca is making use of something called semitone planning, which essentially is just taking your entire chord and transposing it down by 1 semitone to transition into another chord. And this is especially helpful when transitioning from a super tension-heavy phrase into something very resolute. So this is just what that transition sounds like.
Read you from within. I thought you knew.
And this progression in a whole is literally just like a major 7 city. All it's doing is making use of major 7 chords. And they're connected very beautifully by making use of these chromatic mediant relationships, as well as that semitone planning. So now let's get into the chorus chords.
I thought you knew. No matter how much you feel it, the paper and plastic, it's still fun. A way to get back to you. 'Cause I thought you knew. Coming back home, I'm feeling a little bit slow. Don't you see that I'll never get over?
Now, for the verse chords, I couldn't really discern a scale since it's kind of all over the place. But for the chorus, there is a pretty discernible scale, which is E major. And we're playing a progression very commonly seen in like jazz and soul, which is a 2, 5, 1, 4. Starting this progression off with the predominant of our scale, or the 2, kind of acts as a gentle lead-in. It by itself isn't super suspenseful or tense, but it prepares your ears for future movement and tension. After that, making use of a transition from the 5 to the 1 of our scale gives the melody a sense of release. Though instead of just stopping on the resolute 1, which is yet again a very common chord progression, the 2-5-1, we finish it off with the 4, which extends the cadence of our progression. And yet again, towards the end of our progression, we are making use of semitone planning, with this A major 7 being transposed down by 1 semitone. And if you find that your semitone planning just doesn't sound super natural, try to transition 2 chords that are a whole step away from each other. So at the end of these chorus chords, we have this A major, and we use semitone planning to go down to that G sharp, which transitions us to the first chord of our verse chord progression, which is G. So essentially, we're just working down by a semitone. So A, down by a semitone, G sharp, down by another semitone, G. This is just going to make the semitone planning sound much more natural and resolute. So now let's get into the next section, which is our outro. And this is one of those sections that's very, very hard to describe in terms of music theory, but I'm going to do my best. So from what I can tell, we are still in E major, but the tone switches by a lot. And that is because we start our progression off with a chord that just straight up is not in E major, which is G major. And we're essentially just working our way up and down the scale, making use of the 2, 5, 6, 4, and 3 of our scale. And this progression is super weird and tense as it resolves down to our G major, which isn't in our scale, but at the same time sounds very natural. I don't really quite know how to describe it. It's very, very odd. Though one reasoning behind why that G major might not sound super out of place is because it's derived from E minor, the minor version of E major, which we're working in. So it's not just a chord pulled from the ether. It has some kind of relationship to our scale. But yeah, this progression right here is a work of art that I can barely even begin to break down. And then during this last verse, it just repeats our main chord progression, going from that G major 7 to the B major 7. So yeah, with Godstained, there is just so much to learn from and pull from in terms of music theory. But in my opinion, the main concepts that are most prevalent are chromatic mediant relationships and semitone planning. So if you're gonna take away anything, take that away. Also, before I get into the next song, I forgot to mention that there is a tempo switch between the first verse and the first chorus, going from 148 BPM to 153. It's something that's very, very simple and honestly isn't really like discernible by ear, but it's also a super interesting way to bring up the energy without the listener like noticing too much. I don't know, just thought that was kind of cool and thought I'd throw that in there before going into the next song, which is going to be At a Time Like This. And holy shit, this song is just a cacophony of chromaticism. There is no discernible key. Every chord sounds weird. Like, I don't know how he made this shit work, but I'm gonna do my best to explain it. So the first thing I'm gonna go over are these intro chords. And this is an incredibly uneasy progression, playing in what I think is A sharp major. And it's going from G sharp major to A sharp major to G sharp major to D sharp major. And the first chord, G sharp major, is being borrowed from the A sharp Mixolydian scale, which is what gives it that uneasy sound. Though it lands on the root, which is A major, giving it that bit of push-pull sound that we heard in Waging War, alternating between dissonance and consonance. And the progression lands on the 4 of our scale, leaving it a bit open-ended, while at the same time providing melodic context in our A sharp major scale. So that it's not just 2 chords alternating from dissonance and consonance. So now let's get into these verse chords. And this is pretty much exactly the same as our first chord progression, but instead of the second chord being an A sharp major 7, it is instead a G major 7. And with this, yet again, we're making use of semitone planning, playing a chord that is just 1 semitone down. So this right here is all just dissonant. It just sounds super spooky and uneasy. But it makes this D sharp major act as a resolution factor, ending it in a way that kind of wraps up, but still feels very open-ended and suspenseful. So let's get into the next progression, which plays during this spoken word section. So this progression is essentially a descending chain of major 7 chords. Yet again, Quad loves his major 7 chords. And it's pretty chromatic in nature. It doesn't really fit a scale unless you force it into one and work out the kinks. But the further use of this chromaticism makes this first half of the song sound incredibly uneasy and tense. Which leads us into our chorus chords.
Call it what you want. But there's karma in the current when it's calm. Whatever gets me, don't get me wrong. Whatever gets me probably had me all.
And this is the first progression within this song that purely fits within a scale. Like every single note is in a scale, and the scale being F sharp major. But this provides a sense of resolution to the suspense built up during the first half with that chromaticism. And it's playing a progression going from the 4 to the 3 of our scale, which in and of itself is a very tension heavy phrase. But in the context of this incredibly chromatic song is a breath of fresh air. And finally, let's go over these outro chords.
I was born in the wrong, with a puzzle of songs, where the colors is soft. Keep holding your breath, when the tunnels collapse, and the wish is intact.
Now, this progression introduces the 1 of our scale, further amplifying the resolute nature of the second half of this song. And this is a much more open progression as opposed to that 4-3, which is just clustered semitones. This is ranging all over the place, which consequently makes the song sound much more open. And this progression pretty much just repeats throughout the entire outro and ends on this B major 7, which is the 4 of our scale, which is a resolute ending, but it also leaves the song a little bit open-ended. But yeah, that's all the chords throughout the entire song. And I'd say the main takeaway from this song is that you can introduce dissonance and chromaticism in a song that sounds beautiful. And this is by building up that suspense, whether it be through the first half of the song, the first 30 seconds of the song, or just the intro of the song, using that chromaticism, and releasing it by using very resolute phrases that reside within your scale. This whole song is just an extended version of tension and release, with this first half being the tension and the second half being the release. It's very, very masterfully done and an incredible representation of tension and release. So now let's get into the next song on this album, Monday. God, I love this song. I have a feeling throughout this video, you're gonna slowly see me go insane because I've already been recording for an hour and 20 minutes. So this whole video is probably gonna be like a 3 or 4 hour long recording. So bear with me if I start to lose my marbles a little bit. So this is yet another song that makes use of a 3/4 time signature. And it's one of those songs that sounds very waltzy and sea shanty-esque, which in my opinion is probably intentional, as the theme of the album is sailing. So the first thing that I'd like to cover is just our main string progression. And this just plays an alternating progression going from a C major 9 chord, omitting the 3rd, to a C major 7 chord. This is very, very stable and catchy due to the repetitive nature of the chords. And it's also using the root note of our scale as an anchor to connect these 2 chord inversions. And then I guess you could also look at this progression as a G major to E minor progression, just using the C as an anchor note. But in and of themselves, they're basically just inversions and additions of C major. So let's go over the next progression, which is this piano that plays during the verse.
It's that time of the year where I start getting old. There's traditions I try just to see what it'll hold.
And this is essentially just playing a downward stair pattern, starting on the 6 of our scale, working our way down to the 3, and then back up to the 4. So while the main progression plays up here, it's making use of thirds and roots in the bass notes, allowing the progression to fall naturally, rather than coming back up towards the end to that 4th. And that literally just repeats throughout the entire verse. So now let's get into this chorus.
Darling, don't you give up on a Monday. I wanna tell you I want you. You probably take it the wrong way. God, I'm losing my grip on the runway. I wanna get there with
And for the first half, it's playing a progression going from the 1 to the 4 of our scale. G to C. And I misspoke during the intro portion. C is not the root of our scale. It's a G major scale. My apologies. And then for the second half, we're going from the 5 to the 4 of our scale. Now, the scale degrees 1, 4, and 5 are very safe and stable degrees to play in tandem with each other, making the melody sound very relaxed. And we're making use of thirds, fifths, and roots in the bass line, as well as a bass line that walks up to contrast with the walking down piano during the verse section. So yeah, if you want a nice little relaxed progression, use the 1, 4, and 5, and don't be afraid to make use of bass notes that aren't your root. And that verse and chorus progression essentially just repeats until the bridge. Now, during the bridge, we're changing the key of the song from G major to C major. Now, C and G are a perfect fifth interval, which makes the key change very drastic as it's quite a walk away from G major, but it's also very natural as a perfect fifth interval is very stable and the keys share many of the same notes. And during this first half, we're playing a 4, 3, 5 progression. And during the second half, we're playing a much more complex progression, making use of lots of chromaticism to further amplify the dramatic nature of this bridge. And the chromaticism being made use of are flat 7s, flat 6s, and flat 3rds. So here's what that progression sounds like. Now, one key takeaway I'd say for this song is a way to naturally introduce key changes while not being too jarring is to switch your key a perfect fifth away from your original one. So if you're originally working in D major and you want to introduce a key change, try changing it to A major, or vice versa. If you're working in A major, try changing it to D major. It's not going to be a super jarring change, but it's going to be a noticeable one. So now let's get into the next song on this album, marking the halfway point, which is Dancing Without Moving. And the first thing that I want to go over are these intro chords. Now, this song is in the key of E major, and it's playing a progression going from the 1 to the 7 to the 4 to the flat 3. So it's essentially playing a pretty standard progression up until the end, where that flat third is introduced, which is being derived from our E minor scale. This is something that I've been seeing pop up a lot. To introduce dissonance, Quadeca likes to borrow chords from the minor versions of his major scale. And it's a very easy and often effective method, so I heavily recommend making use of that if you want to introduce dissonance in your chord progressions. So yeah, the intro is just a very small part of the song, so let's get into the verse section now.
I had this feeling since I was the age of 2. I might as well do my dance without a crew, so I can step away from it like excuse you. Brush 'em off, no step without a
Now, this is just a very simple 2-chord progression, going from the 3 of our scale to a flat 7. Yet again, introducing the key term prevalent throughout every single song on this album, dissonance. So now let's get into the most interesting part of this song, which is the chorus.
You always feel like I'm turning my mind.
And this progression is very similar to our verse, playing a pattern going from the 3 to the flat 7. But we are introducing a syncopated flat 3. And if you'll remember during the intro section, the last chord that we left off on is a flat 3. After hearing that 3 to flat 7 progression for a bit during the verse, it almost begins to sound natural and not as uneasy. But by introducing yet another dissonant borrowed chord, he is doubling down on that unexpected chromaticism and making it even more unexpected by syncopating the chord and delaying it a little bit. So yeah, essentially just those verse and chorus progressions repeat pretty much throughout the entire song. That is aside from the bridge. And this shit is fucking insane. I'm not even going to begin to pretend that I understand what's going on here, nor that I got all of the chords correct, because it sounds super jumbled and messy. But it's essentially just a cacophony of 7 and sus4 chords, making it sound super jazzy and tension heavy.
I wanna see you get low. Second son, I wanna spin you back around in front of everyone. Show me everything I miss in this millennium. Not coming live from inside the moon, believe it or not. I feel the rhythm from my phone, I'm slipping it out. Let that dance be a vessel, see what you got. Any second, he's gonna.
I will say though, Quadeca has a very good knack for making transitions between sections sound super natural through the chords. And what I mean by that is that at the end of this bridge section, we are playing an F sharp major 7, which transitions beautifully into the first chord of our chorus, this G sharp minor 7. So if you have two very distinctly different sections and you don't want the change to be super abrupt and in the listener's face, try making use of transition chords at the end of certain sections. So yeah, that along with deriving chords from the minor version of your scale is pretty much the key takeaway from this song in terms of music theory. I'd say this is definitely one of the more simple songs in terms of music theory, but the way it's executed is incredibly effective. So now let's get into the song that was the biggest pain in the ass to break down. That's Why. And my hair started falling out and turning gray just trying to break down this song. Holy shit. But with that being said, don't even try to figure out what key this song is in. There's too many damn key changes, too much chromaticism, and I'm only going to be covering the second half of this song. Mostly because the first half just plays a lot of droning chords and there isn't really enough going on melodically for me to cover it. So let's go over the first section of our chorus.
That's fine, alright. That's fine, alright. Forgetting days,
So this section makes use of a lot of semitone planning to transition into other chords. For example, to transition from this F to this D sharp, we're using the note that resides right in between those two, which is E, to transition. As well as that to transition from this G to F, we're using F sharp, which is right in between those two. On top of that, this progression uses a lot of very unique chord types, including sus2, sus4s, and diminished chords. And this really just makes the progression more unique and emphasizes the tension within it, since the thirds of our chords aren't typically prevalent. As well as that, many of these passing chords share notes with the chords that they're trying to transition to or from. And this just makes the transition sound a little bit more natural, even though the progression in itself is a little bit odd. So now let's go over the progression in the second half of this chorus.
if I wasn't me, would I still be me? It's like if I woke up in that other body.
And this progression makes use of semitone planning yet again, but in a bit of a more resolute way. Whereas before, the chords that we were trying to transition were a whole step away from each other, and we just introduced that half step in between them so it only goes down by half steps. With this progression, it transitions using half step intervals, but then goes down by a whole step. As well as that, it plays a much more predictable pattern, almost relieving the tension of the first pattern, while also still in and of itself sounding very suspenseful and tense. And finally, this progression finishes off with some conventional semitone planning, jumping only in half steps. As well as that, it's also kind of a deeper layer of semitone planning, as right here it goes from G sharp to G to F sharp, but then transitions into the next chord progression, which starts with F. So it's going G sharp, G, F sharp, F. So not only is it using semitone planning towards the end of the progression, but it's also using it to transition into the first part of the next progression, yet again further demonstrating that concept. So yeah, aside from that, those two progressions pretty much just play for the entirety of the second half until the bridge.
Every mirror in my life makes another blind spot. Every ex that I got asks the question, why not? When my compass lies to me, cause I keep putting it on the spot. Listen for the truth, very true, blaring on the dots. Wasn't over from the oven, but it only touched the touch. That's a sore spot, that's a sore. Every mirror in my life makes another blind spot. Everything that I got is
And this progression just fucking triples down on that semitone planning, using it in a way that is all over the place. Though it's important to mention that each chord cluster is making use of the circle of fifths, aka either jumping up by 7 semitones or jumping down by 5 semitones. So for example, this G sharp, if you count down by 5 semitones, leads into this D sharp. And inversely, if you count up 7 semitones from this C sharp, it gets you to G sharp. So while the chords may seem all over the place, there is a rule to the madness. As well as that, it finishes off with a very resolute progression. Assuming the key to be F major, we're going from the 1 to the 4 to an augmented fourth to the second. And on this second, the tonic of our scale, aka the 1, is the highest note. So even though the 2 of a scale isn't typically a very resolute chord, it sounds like a very nice ending. As with this augmented chord change, we're going from that F to the out of scale F sharp, down by a half step, resolving into the F. So yeah, the main takeaway from this song is if you want dissonant sounding chord progressions, make use of semitone planning. And if you want it to sound more natural, make use of the circle of fifths, going down by 5 semitones or going up by 7 semitones for chord changes. So now let's go into the next song, which is a breath of fresh air after working on That's Why, which is I Dream About Sinking. And this is the most simple song in terms of music theory. And it's essentially just making use of a 4-3-6-5 progression throughout the course of the entire song. And it uses the fifth of our scale, or the C, as the final chord of the song. And it plays during the most grand section of the song, acting as a means of power since it never resolves down to that tonic. Obviously, I'm not just gonna play the whole fucking song, so I'm just gonna play the chords out one by one. That's literally the progression for the entire song. So now that we're done with that little intermission of sorts, let's get into the next song, Natural Causes. And before I get into this song, I want to mention that it's in 4/4. It doesn't sound like it's something that's important to measure, but it's going to make sense. So the main chord progression prevalent throughout this song plays a very simple progression, going from the 4 to the 5 to the 6. But what's interesting is that this is a series of 3 chords repeating rather than 4 or 2. It's repeating as if it was in 3/4. But the song is in 4/4. So like this 3 chord phrase right here just repeats over and over again. This gives the progression an incredibly unpredictable quality, as certain chords never really land on the same spot, so the progression doesn't repeat itself in a conventional manner. Like for this half it starts on F sharp, but then for this half it starts on G sharp, and like the second to last chord is F sharp, and then it ends on G sharp even though it started with G sharp. It's all over the place. But yeah, this is what it sounds like in context with the song. Now, I wanted to cover that before the intro because it covers the main concept throughout this song, which is that series of 3 chords repeating. Now, as for the intro, we're playing a similar progression to the main chord progression, but instead we're starting on the 5 of our scale. So it's going 5, 6, 4, 5, 6, 4, 5, 6. As well as that, it's playing the same chord pretty much the whole way through, which is just a C sharp major, just in different positions. Like here it's in root position, here the 3rd is the lowest note in the chord, like it's kind of all over the place as well. So next, let's go over this small little refrain section. So for this section, the scale changes to A sharp major, and it's playing a pretty dissonant progression, going from the 1 to the 4 with a flat 3rd. In A sharp major, the 4 chord is typically a D sharp major. But to make things more dissonant, he changed the 4 chord. Oh, you fucking kidding me. But to make things more dissonant, he changes it from that intended major position to a minor by flattening the 3rd, making a typically resolute progression into an incredibly dissonant movement. And those are pretty much the only 3 progressions that play throughout the entire song. But that repeating 3 chord cluster makes it much more complex and interesting. So now with that being said, let's get into the next song, Thundrrr. I was lightning before the thunder. Now, Thundrrr is in a G chromatic scale. Essentially what that means is we're just making use of all 12 notes on the scale, with G essentially acting as our root note. Mainly just because in the context of all the melodies, it sounds the most resolute. So first let's go over this main sinister melody. So this is pretty much playing a downward stare pattern, essentially spelling out a G sharp 7 chord, which is essentially just a G sharp major 7 with a flat 7. And an incredibly harsh and suspenseful chord. So this little downward G♯7 pattern leads into G, the root note of our scale. There's really no rhyme or reason to it, but by starting on a dominant 7 chord, we are introducing a lot of tension, especially since it's played on a very like detuned slidey instrument. But by bringing in that G afterwards, we are essentially resolving the suspense without getting rid of it. So now let's get into the thing that everybody remembers about this song, the vocal melody. Now, this makes use of G and G♯, the notes that are very prevalent throughout our main melody, though it introduces a note that does not play in our main melody, which is F. So in total, with the vocal melody and the main melody, we're making use of F, F♯, G, and G♯, which is a big cluster of notes which typically wouldn't be made use of in any traditional song. This big semitone cluster of dissonance is what gives that song that psychotic and maniacal sound. Since it's something incredibly unstable and uncommon, we hear it and we're like, oh, what the hell is that? What should I be doing? Like, it's anxiety inducing, essentially. And this is no coincidence, as our ears have been trained to associate chromaticism of this intensity with like madness and psychosis, as these techniques are used a lot in horror themes, including the Psycho theme and the Shining theme. So essentially these notes tap into a cultural code associated with anxiety and dread and horror, which personifies the feeling of this song. Whether or not that was intentional, I am unsure, but it's a masterclass in inducing uneasiness through music. Now, the final thing that I want to get into for this song is the bridge. Now, this progression makes use of a change from a C minor chord to a C suspended 2nd chord. And this change from a minor to a suspended chord is like the textbook way to create suspense in a melody, as this little half-step interval right here paired with the root and perfect 5th just gives that sense of tension and uneasiness. On top of that, yet again, we're making use of another huge semitone cluster, as we make use of C, C♯, D, and D♯. This gives the song a bit of a melodic movement while still tapping into that very anxious and horror themed sound. On top of that, there's no real resolution with this progression, further amplifying the tension of this song. So the main takeaway I want you to learn from this song is if you want a song that sounds as fucking maniacal and psychotic as this, make use of music theory techniques used in horror themes, like these giant semitone clusters and suspended chords and just spooky shit. This song is yet again one of my favorites on the album. I didn't really like it too much when I first heard it, but after analyzing it, I have a whole new appreciation for it. It is fucking insane. So now let's get into yet another very maniacal and dark song, the Great Bakunawa. And this song is one of the more simple in terms of music theory up until the end. There's some really cool shit going on at the end. So pretty much throughout the entire song, this chord repeats. And it's essentially just a perfect 5th interval between an A♯ and an F. Essentially just an A♯ chord without the 3rd. And this acts as a pedal tone throughout the entire song, which essentially is just a repeated tone that continues while other parts of the song change around it, like the melodies. And this is something that's yet again super common in horror movie scores, since they kind of give like a low ominous hum that doesn't resolve. On top of that, perfect 5ths are pretty ambiguous, as you can't tell if it's a major or minor chord since it's lacking that 3rd. So since this song pretty much avoids the 3rd altogether, the harmonies sound incredibly dark and uncertain. So let's get into this melody that is prevalent pretty much throughout the entire first half of the song. And this melody is essentially just making use of half-step intervals, which, if you've watched any amount of this video, you'll know are very tension and suspense heavy intervals. And they create tension in tandem with that original melody, as we're making use of that 5th being A and pairing it with that A♯, creating a very dissonant semitone cluster, further adding to the uneasiness of the entire song. So that's pretty much the only thing that's prevalent throughout the first half of the song. But this second part, this is where shit gets interesting. And it plays a pattern essentially working down towards this A♯ major major third harmony, which in context of the rest of the beat gives it a sense of resolution, which is missing entirely in this song. But it does not stay with that resolution for too long, as it drops down one semitone shortly after. This inversion makes the top note reside outside of our scale, giving it that dramatic ending. And on top of that, there's also a really weird time signature change in this portion of the song. For the first 5 beats, it's in 4/4, and then for the next 2 beats, it's in 3/4. So I'll count it out with y'all. 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 4. It's nuts. And that is yet another thing that adds to the uncertainty of this song, as you expect it to end in 4/4, obviously, because that's how the rest of the song is and that's how most songs are. But that little 3/4 refrain, as well as the dissonant ending to that melody, just throws a wrench in that, further adding to just the calamitous nature of this song. It's masterful. That's all I'm trying to say. So, key takeaways. Use pedal tones and half-step intervals in tandem with each other to create an uneasy sound. And don't be afraid to make use of momentary time signature changes if you want your beat to sound much more uneasy and unpredictable. So now, let's get into the song that I think everybody wants to know about in terms of music theory. Forgone. Now, the song starts off in a 3/4 time signature at a BPM of 127. And this changes later on during the song, so that's why I'm saying it now. So let's get into this main progression. Okay, so this progression is playing in the scale of C major. And to me, at least, this is clearly intentional, as Quadeca was very obviously going for like a church-like hymn sound. And C major is the scale that is most commonly used with these types of songs, as they're easy to transcribe onto books, as there's no flats or sharps. As well as that, it being in a 3/4 time signature also may be representative of the hymn-like sound, as songs like Oh Worship the King and My Faith Looks Up to Thee are written in a 3/4 time signature, giving it that waltzy sound. I don't know if either of those were intentional on Quadeca's part, but I thought it was just a cool little thing to throw in. So the progression itself is fairly simple, going from the 3 to the 4 to the 1 to the 4 to the 5. And these are all relatively stable and common chords, giving the progression a sense of familiarity. And that main top line melody plays a pattern alternating between long and short melodic phrases, acting as a call and response technique, further adding to the catchiness and singability of this song. And finally, the progression ends on a 4-bar refrain, purely playing the 1 of our scale, C major, giving it a resolute break in between each section. And this progression repeats up until the 2-minute mark, where the bridge comes in. And in this bridge, we are key changing from C major to F major. And the interval between C and F is a perfect fourth, which is a noticeable yet natural transition. And something that makes it even more of a natural transition is that it starts with the same rhythm as the first progression, while playing only notes that C major and F major share. So this kind of makes the key change not really hit until the second half of the pattern, where it starts playing notes that are primarily in F major. And it plays a pretty resolute melody, making use of the 3, 4, 5, and 6 of our scale. So this is what that sounds like. And after that bridge, we just transition into our main melody yet again, up until the 3 minute and 30 second mark, where we have yet another bridge section. Now, this bridge doesn't change keys from our C major scale, but it sounds like a pretty drastic change as it makes use of the 2 of our scale, which has not been utilized in any other patterns. Starting off with the 2 essentially just throws the tension in your face right off the bat. And this tension is further exemplified by moving right into the 5th of our scale, and by changing chord types from minor to major by sharpening the 3rd. As well as that, the progression ends on the 5th of our scale, which in and of itself is a very open-ended ending, giving it a sense that there is more to come. Which could explain why this song doesn't just feel like an 8-minute long trudge. Having these continuations make it so that it isn't just an 8-bar loop repeating over and over and over again. There's clear intention behind the scale degree chosen, and it almost acts as a bit of foresight into the next part of the song. So this is what that sounds like. And now let's get into the final portion of this song that I want to cover, which is the outro. And you know how I said the song starts in 3/4? Well, this section is in 4/4 at 148 BPM, essentially just switching the whole timing of the entire song. As well as that, to make the change even more drastic, we are changing the key from C major to D major. And for the first half, we're playing long, drawn out chords that mostly revolve around the 4, 5, and 2 of our scale. But for the second half, we start with the 1 of our scale, bringing up and uplifting the entire pattern. As well as that, to introduce some dissonance in this very dramatic outro, we're making use yet again of that semitone leading by transposing chords up or down by a semitone. And finally, we finish off on the 5th scale degree yet again, but this time in D major. So we finish off on A major. And this yet again gives you that unfinished sound, leaving you with wanting more. So this is just what a small portion of that outro sounds like, because if I were to play it, it'd be like 1 minute and 30 seconds long. So that's going to completely cover everything you need to know about that song. Some key takeaways are the intentional use of certain scales and time signatures to fit a theme, like using C major and 3/4 to fit that church hymn-like theme. As well as that, making use of key changes that revolve around perfect 4th intervals. And finally, if there is more to come in your song, leaving things off on the 5 makes listeners anticipate that there is something else at the end of the tunnel, essentially. So now, let's go into the final song of this album, Casper. Now, the entire intro of this song plays a very, very simple progression. And similarly to Forgone, we start in a 3/4 time signature, but change to a 4/4 time signature later on. So the first progression that it plays resides within A major, and it goes from an A sus2 to an F major to an E sus2. And within the context of our scale, F major is incredibly dissonant as it doesn't reside within it. So it's essentially acting as a flat 6 chord, being derived from A minor, giving it that tense sound. And that progression just repeats up until the 3-minute mark of this song, where the time signature is changed along with the key, going from A major to G major. And this is pretty much just fucking half-step interval city. We're making use of 2 half-step intervals within G major, C and B, as well as F sharp and G. Though we're also making use of one that does not reside within our scale, D sharp and E, with the D sharp landing outside of the scale. Yet again, this D sharp is derived from our G minor scale. So essentially the D sharp and E are the 6th degree of our minor scale, D sharp, and the 6th degree of our major scale, E. Having this amount of half-step intervals, yet again, further emphasizes the tension of this section of the song, and it builds that tension into that inevitable huge heavy drop. Now, as for the vocal melodies, we're making use of a concept called leitmotifs. And this is essentially just a repeated musical phrase throughout a musical piece of work, like an album. And this vocal melody is a slightly altered version of the one from No Questions Asked. This not only gives the album a sense of cohesion, as the first and last song on the album have matching musical phrases, but also introduces this vocal melody in an extremely different context. No Questions Asked is very easygoing and uplifting, even repeating the phrase, "I'll be there when no one is," a very comforting phrase. Whereas Casper just sounds like pure Armageddon and calamity. So it's cool to hear this vocal melody in an entirely different context. Now, the alteration of this vocal melody comes from transposing it down by a semitone during the second section, doubling down on that half-step interval sound. And now, the final portion of this song that I want to cover, and the highlight of the entire fucking album, is the outro. And music theory wise, it's pretty simple. The main wow factor of it comes from the mixing techniques. But it plays a very simple melody, yet again, making use of those half-step intervals. This time being stretched out for a long period of time. This constant tension further emphasizes the calamitous and dramatic nature of this final section, as it never really resolves. So yeah, that's going to completely sum up Casper. Some main takeaways from that are going to be to use half-step intervals if you want your shit to sound dark, sinister, and dramatic. I've said it so many times, not only just in this video, but in all my other tutorials. Half-step intervals are the key to making something sound dark. So if you want that dark sound, make sure to use them. And then the second takeaway is the use of leitmotifs to create cohesion throughout an album. And this is prevalent not only in Vanisher, but also in Hypochondriac by Breakins, where he says the phrase, "A hypochondriac, I think of you, blood pressure spikes," pretty much throughout the entire album, and only finishes the phrase on the last song. As well as that, it's used in Imaginal Disc by Magdalena Bay, with a repeated vocal melody showing up throughout the entire album. It's just something you could do to make your album seem like a more comprehensive piece of work, rather than just a playlist. So yeah, that's gonna completely cover the music theory behind every single song on Quadeca's Vanisher Horizon Scraper. This shit took me so long to make, so I'm so happy it's finally come to fruition. Like literally just this recording process alone, I've been recording for 4 hours. My camera has overheated 3 times, my battery exhausted 3 times. Like, it's been a long, arduous process, but I'm so grateful I did it, as I learned so much and I get to teach you guys everything that I learned. So if you enjoyed today's video and learned something new and want to support what I do, go ahead and leave a like on the video and subscribe. As well as that, I have other Quadeca content on this channel, so be sure to check that out. And finally, yet again, if you want to delve deeper into the music theory of this album, go ahead and check out the link in the description where you can get all of the MIDIs, all of my project file breakdowns, and a full 11-page PDF going into deep detail on the music theory. So yeah, other than that, it's going to be it. Peace!